Okay, it's 6:03, so let's get going. Um, it's 2 weeks since the last time, obviously. It's so many weeks since we began this. We're deep into the 10th month, which is rather hard to believe. Um, but here we are. It's been 2 weeks of complete waiting. Um, I don't even quite explain what that's like in a way. Um, at some point it starts becoming less and less onerous, so you start thinking, okay, well, life has to go on regularly, and that's what you start doing. You start thinking less about it. um, the first week you stay very close to your home and you limit what you're going to do, and you start doing a little more. And the weekend, went swimming. Today I went swimming again. Maybe the time has passed to some extent. It's hard to know. Um, Obviously, the geopolitical situation in many ways is impossible to know. Um, it's impossible to know how how all this is going to resolve. And of course, the biggest problem, of course, is we're dealing with the fact that the hostages are still there, and it's very, very unclear whether these negotiations are going to work or not work. My greatest fear until now was that Netanyahu was going to, in some which way, sabotage the talks. I think, and very, very carefully think, because I don't really know. Obviously, no one knows. No one's inside his mind. But I think he may have made the decision to take the political risk and go with the hostage deal. But if he gets the deal that's on the table and Hamas doesn't say no, we have no way of knowing what Sinwar is going to do or not going to do. Anyone who thinks he understands Sinwar should go back to October 6th and tell us to understand Sinwar, because we clearly don't understand Sinwar. Um, how much he wants, first of all, 6 weeks of freedom, that could be a big, big factor. Um, is he going to get from us his life, a guarantee of his life? Highly unlikely, even if the second phase goes through. But on the other hand, um, he did make that promise to get all these Palestinian prisoners out a long, long time ago. And maybe that's the last thing he wants to do, is get as many Palestinian prisoners and terrorists out of Israeli jails. That could be ultimately what he wants to do, and he's willing to do it and make a deal. We don't know. And anyone who says they do know, even the ones who have some knowledge, a few correspondents um, who've met him, talked to him, have certainly better sense than I do. But I basically come to the conclusion that I mean, at some point I just turn them all off, because they just don't know. Everyone's just guessing, and they contradict each other. And you can listen to, channel 12 and channel 13 and channel 11 and get different guesses. And that's all it is a matter of guesses. We need this ceasefire. There's no question about it. If we didn't have hostages, I would say we need to just get out of Gaza at this point and give our army a rest. But we have hostages, and we can't get out of Gaza as long as there are hostages there without a deal. So I don't know. It's excruciating. I can only try to imagine. I can't really imagine what it's like for the families of the hostages who have gone through roller coaster after roller coaster after roller coaster. And yes, optimistic, no optimistic, yes, optimistic, optimistic, and Netanyahu says something, etc., etc. This is about as optimistic as anyone has been, including Netanyahu, actually. Um, but it's an unknown. It's a complete unknown. Um, Clearly, we don't want a regional war right now, despite the fact that some people, really want it. Maybe the people in the north keep on saying, we're not going to go back unless there's a war and you destroy Hezbollah. The only problem with that plan, um, is that we really don't have the troops to go and have a wider war with. So to make them think we do, and we do if we have to, but it's far from optimum. So um, so we'll have to see. I mean, I don't know what the people in the north are going to decide to do if we come to a peace agreement, temporary peace agreement with Hezbollah. Um, people saying that ultimately we're going to have to go to war with Hezbollah. Maybe. I think ultimately the Iranian, if we're going to have peace in this country, in the medium term, the Iranian regime has to be overturned, and I've written that. It's the only solution, but that's something that we alone can't do. The United States has to do it. Europeans have to do it. Everyone has to be convinced that that's what needs to be done. Not sure we're there or going to get there. Certainly, our Arab Sunni partners will certainly agree with that and would want that to happen. But we should be wanting it. It's been since 1977 that they've controlled Iran, and none of us have done. Yeah, we've tried, and I assume in various ways, but I don't think we've really done any significant effort at regime change. So I don't know. I really don't know. Meanwhile, our war of attrition with Hezbollah continues. We keep on hitting targets. We've killed a significant number of the Hezbollah fighters, significant number of their commanders. Their ability to fire anti-tank missiles into Israel seems to be tremendously diminished, which is good because the anti-tank missiles we have no defense for, because the anti-tank missiles are line of sight and they are too quick and too low really for Iron Dome to intercept. Only a point defense system can intercept them, and it seems they have less and less ability to fire them. Part of the reason is, of course, they have to be close to the border in order to fire them. And we've basically been hitting any Hezbollah person we've seen within a few miles of the border. So that has decreased the number of anti-tank missiles fired. That has not decreased the rockets. When they want to fire rockets, they fire it in response usually to our killings of one of their people. And they also keep on using drones. We still do not have a good defense against drones. It's really hard for me to believe that we're almost 9 months and we haven't developed as good a defense system. Actually, almost 10 months, almost 11 months was getting pushing, excuse me. If we're that at this point, we haven't developed a defense system against the drones as good as the Ukrainians have. But Ukraine still has a better system for defending against drones than we do. And that's really a problem. It's also a problem if we get into an all-out war with Hezbollah, because we have a defense system against their rockets, even their big rockets and the precision rockets and all those things. We have a defense against all of them. Do we have a big enough defense? Do we have enough interceptors? Those are all questions which I hope we don't have to find out. But we do have systems to defend against everything else. We do not have an effective system to defend against drones in place. And that's a big problem. Let's put it that way, as we've seen. In the meantime, what's going on in the West Bank is terrible on both levels. Terrible what the settlers are doing, and it's not some extreme group of 10 people. It's a significant number, and it's a planned action, and it's an ongoing action, and it's an ongoing action where it's under the radar, where some of the settlers are pushing out the local Arabs, scaring them, forcing them to leave. It's in place, and I'm sure it quietly gets the support of 2 or 3 of our government ministers. And so it's very problematic from an international point of view, from a moral point of view, from any of those points of view. In the meantime, the West Bank is after the first half or more of the war, where the West Bank was pretty quiet. We've seen significant uptake, in terrorism in the West Bank. We had the case today where a security guard on one of the settlements was attacked by a Palestinian terrorist. His gun was taken. It doesn't look good for him. He's in the hospital in very, very serious condition. So, and it's not looking good. So that's in a long string of attacks that have taken place in the West Bank over the last couple of months, where it started to get particularly problematic. And then finally we get down to Gaza, where, yesterday we lost 2 soldiers in a a highway, a byway, whatever, that we had going into Gaza that was supposedly secure. We've been using it since almost the very beginning of the war, and yet, despite that fact, Hamas people popped up in some tunnel into a building, remotely let go of an IED when our trucks were passing, and then tried to attack the convoy. That's an area that theoretically we've cleared out, we've cleaned out, etc., etc. It's quote unquote the area that Netanyahu doesn't want armed terrorists to be allowed to go to. Unfortunately, they're already there. So, we're paying the price. We continue to pay the price for the lack of a plan. The fact that we have no plan for the day after it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe the government has not had one significant discussion on a plan for the day after. And the day after is here. I mean, there's very little more we can go. Keep on going back to the same places, and I'm sure we'll kill a few more terrorists every time we go back.
Tell us.
And maybe we'll find some more tunnels that we haven't found, and it's all good and fine. But there's no part except 2 areas we're afraid to go to because they're hostage.
Volunteers are burning out. We have a system to double check the numbers, but we can't catch everything.
I mean, I can still remember.
Can someone mute? Thank you. So we keep on going back to these same places. Hamas is still there. Certainly not in the same numbers, certainly not in the numbers that were threatened within our borders at the moment. But there is no such thing as total victory. What is that supposed to mean? I write tonight about a series that I saw on TV. I saw the last part of, which was on the World War II flyers that Spielberg and Tom Hanks did together. Great series. And I saw over the weekend the last part of it, which I've been watching over the last, 4 or 5 months.
You need a ride?
One couple of weeks.
Do you need a ride?
So whoever's needing a ride there, please turn off mute. In any case, and it was hard to watch that, and it was, forget all the terrible things that happened during World War II, but there was victory. The end of the series, those POWs that were in German camps were liberated. The flyers who had managed to survive all the bombings over the years from England to Europe and Germany, they made their last final flights, and there was victory. VE Day, they went home. Sure, there's a terrible price, and those flyers also paid a terrible price. But in the end, there was victory. VE Day, VJ Day. We will not have that. Certainly not in this war. We really haven't had it since the 6-Day War, and maybe the 6-Day War is part of the problem. It's too much of a myth in Israeli methodology. In other words, the people who are saying we should do a preemptive strike on Iran or a preemptive strike on Hezbollah, just like we did in the 6-Day War. The only problem with that is, yes, we have a very powerful Air Force, but what the Americans have learned, and that we've certainly learned in the previous Lebanese war, that preemptive strikes on missiles that are stored in caves and underground places is not the same thing as destroying your enemy's Air Force on the ground, on the runways, in open hangars. So what happened in the 6-Day War was unique. It was unique because we destroyed the Arab Air Forces within hours. Most of it was destroyed in the first hour, frankly, the Egyptian Air Force. But we could do that because their planes were parked on the ground, and we made a surprise attack and we destroyed their Air Forces. And when the few planes got up, our pilots were better, and we shot them down. but we're not dealing with other planes. If we had dealing with conventional air forces, I wouldn't be concerned. Our air force is better than any other conventional air force in the Middle East. But we're dealing with an asymmetric warfare against missile forces that are embedded in rocks and caves in all sorts of places. That, yes, you can attack individual launch sites, and I'm sure you can knock out a few launch sites. But we learned in Gaza, which is really close by, which we theoretically really knew, in all the previous Gaza wars, we would strike against the sources of the firing, but in the last war in Gaza, until the last day, Hamas was firing missiles and almost the same number of missiles at us as they were at the beginning. The only reason we've gotten rid of all the missiles now is because we physically went into Gaza and went to the places the missiles were and destroyed them, and we physically occupied those places. We are not going to physically occupy Iran. We are not going to physically occupy the area in eastern Lebanon and the area around Beirut, where the long-range missiles are located. I mean, it's theoretically possible, but not really recommended. Let's put it that way. Very problematic. So, yes, we can go to the Litani, and probably in an hour or two, all our forces will be at the Litani, and that's very nice. We've done that at least literally 4 times over our history. Not a big deal for us to get to the Litani River at this point. But that's not going to stop the missiles. And we have the same problem with the Houthis. I mean, our action against the Houthis was actually very successful at the moment. So we've deterred them. What's going to happen in the near future, we don't know. But again, the Americans have been attacking the Houthis pretty regularly for the last 6 months, at least their missile sites, and hasn't stopped them. Every single day they intercept another Houthi missile or another Houthi unmanned ship, and the Americans, are located relatively close by with aircraft carriers that can keep on striking, much closer than we are to the Houthis, so closer than we are to the Iranians. So these ideas of total victory or a 6-day war-like victory, all those sort of things are just not realistic. I mean, there's a talk still going back historically if Israel would have attacked on Yom Kippur in the morning beforehand. There again, we weren't dealing in a missile age. We were dealing with anti-aircraft missiles, and there was a plan the Air Force had, which would have first knocked out all of the Egyptian anti-missile systems. And then after that, they could come to the aid of the ground forces. Unfortunately, because we didn't attack initially, by the time the war started, we weren't able to come to the assistance of the ground forces because the anti-missile systems were in place and they were ready for us. So in the case of the Yom Kippur War, a preemptive strike might have made a difference. But again, it was ground forces. The Egyptians did not have ground-to-ground missiles, which is what we're dealing with now. So all these people are talking about preemptive strikes. We're talking about total victory. We're talking about we can't go back to the north until we've beaten Hezbollah. They need to understand what they're talking about. There is no total victory. There is no system that's going to totally defeat these people militarily. Diplomatically, maybe. Don't get me wrong, I'm not an optimist, and you all know that I'm not optimistic about the possibilities of coming to peace with the Palestinians. But the fact that we have no foreign policy doesn't help. Let's put it this way. It doesn't help the fact that we have zero foreign policy. We have zero goals that one can describe what we're trying to achieve. We don't use to leverage the Palestinian issue to our own advantage. We do none of those things. I mean, Kissinger once said a long time ago, this goes back to, I guess, the 70s, where he said Israel doesn't have a foreign policy, it just has a domestic political policy. And if that was true in the 70s, put it to the 10th, powers of the 10, what it's like today. All decisions seem to be politically motivated more than anything else. And, we have a foreign minister who doesn't speak English, barely speaks English, barely speaks French. And when the foreign minister of Great Britain comes yesterday, Netanyahu refuses to meet him because he's in a huff and a puff because Britain said they were removing their block on the International Criminal Court, so he won't meet the foreign minister. Seems like he left it to our excellent foreign minister to meet with the British foreign minister. Seems like a brilliant move on my part, but okay, to my thinking. Okay. So that's the sad state we're in right now. It's depressing to a very large extent. Um, Look, I think we're all holding on hope that somehow this negotiations is going to work out. I would give it 50%. I'm trying to be optimistic. 50% is better than 10% to 20%. If it does work out, it will make a big difference. It will at least get us out of this mess, I hope, including if we go through the second stage, which is another issue. But if we go through the second stage, it'll get back the hostages, it'll get us out of the current mess, it'll give us time to redesign, re-equip, replan the army, hopefully get new leadership both in the army and in the government. I mean, the fact that we're 10 months plus in and absolutely everybody, with the exception of next Wednesday, or maybe it's this Wednesday, the head of intelligence is finally leaving his job, but everybody else is still in the same jobs or in similar jobs they were on October 7th, is remarkable in the negative extent. Nobody has resigned. Nobody's moved aside. Now I know why that is, but it's still terrible. Our prime minister doesn't take responsibility. Our cabinet ministers don't take responsibility. And the further and further we get away, they think, oh, we've gotten away with it. Now we can move on to something else. And the reality is, this country needs to come together, but it's not going to come together as long as that's the case. And we need to be ready for the possibility of another war in our medium-term future, not in our immediate future. But we're just not ready yet. And it's going to require significant rethinking. And I just don't know who the people are going to do the rethinking on. That's what scares me. Is that I don't know who is going to do the rethinking, who is going to do the zero budgeting of the army, which is what's required, not to mention most of the rest of the government. We don't have the people to do those sort of things. We don't have the people who are ready to do those things. And certainly we don't have an understanding amongst the people in power how problematic everything is. Maybe some of them understand it, but I fear most of them don't. And we need zero government, zero everything, to go back and rethink where we stand on so many different ways. Because things have not gone well. It's been a very bad 10 months, and that doesn't even get involved in some of the internal things that have been going on. The hatred being shown to the hostage families, which is ununderstandable, completely ununderstandable. They've become the enemies of part of this country. I don't understand that. I don't know how it can possibly be, but that's what's taken place. And of course, we still get back without even touching the problem of the ultra-Orthodox and their serving and they're being integrated in the economy and all these other matters, which if we had no other problem, they would be serious problems in and of themselves. The fact that they have all these other problems that are related make this problem all the more difficult, all the more challenging, and require solutions that, again, require really competent, thoughtful people to bring them about in a political system that doesn't reward thoughtfulness, long-term planning, and all the things that are necessary to change the direction of this country at this point. So, on that optimistic note, I've too many of my conversations with friends end on that happy note, as we discuss whatever we're discussing on that particular day and move on to whatever the day held. I will end what I have to say on that happy note, then open up for any questions. Last couple of times people have not had too many questions, so please ask a few questions. I always prefer answering questions than just speaking. So just raise your virtual hands if you can. Nobody? Somebody needs to volunteer. Come on.
I'll volunteer, Mark. It's Claude.
Okay, go ahead, Claude.
I think one that we need to recognize that our zealots are as dangerous as the zealots in other countries that start with an I. And the fact that we're not arresting any of them is just shines such a bad light here in the United States. I'm very involved in Hillels, and college is starting, and it's going to start all over again because these more than just Gaza, I believe these West Bank incursions are just destroying people's faith in what being Jewish and Judaism is all about. Sorry to say it that way.
Okay, I'll answer that in two parts. First of all, I don't disagree. Obviously making Itamar Ben-Gvir a Kahanist, the Minister for for National Security, it starts the problem to begin with. And so, yes, it's terrible. It's terrible no one's being arrested. It's on the news repeatedly that no one's being arrested. It's been an ongoing problem. It's been an ongoing problem that's gone on for years. I mean, it's not only it's not just new, it's just gotten much, much worse. If you go back to all of the years of the occupation and what's gone on in the West Bank over the years, it's been a slow and constant process, and those people knew what they want. No one else in this country knows what they want. And so I think that, that says it all more than anything else. The second half of your question, I don't think it would make any difference whether we do what we're doing on the West Bank in terms of the protests. The protests are going to come anyway. They are, to the best of my understanding, pretty well organized, and they're organized about our very existence. And that's part of the problem. It doesn't make it, don't get me wrong, I'm not in any which way saying we shouldn't be doing all the things we should be doing on the West Bank and arresting all these people and all the things that we should be doing, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the protesters would protest anyway, because the protesters move beyond, the occupation, or it's moved beyond ceasefire. What's going to happen tomorrow if, in the end result, this Hamas says no to the ceasefire plan, the plan that Egypt, Qatar, and Israel have agreed to, and Hamas says no? Is the ceasefire group going to say, be pushing Hamas accept the ceasefire? No, they're still going to blame Israel. So again, I'm not in any which way justifying what's going on in the West Bank, not in the slightest bit, but I also don't think that is the direct cause of what's going on the campuses, etc. Laura.
Thank you so much for doing this, and I'm sorry I got on a little bit late. It seemed like the U.S. was trying to create a sense of momentum coming out of Doha with the statements you covered in your excellent post last night. And Blinken's arriving today, and then they're supposed to be meeting again by the end of the week in Cairo. Do you think that they can keep up a sense of momentum? And I don't know if Hamas says no or not, but that they can move it forward?
Okay, I think as long as the ball is on the Israeli court, I think the answer is probably yes. I think Blinken is here. He can do enough pressure on Netanyahu. I think, again, it's a thought. It's not knowing for sure. Like I said, I think that Netanyahu has made the strategic decision that he's willing to risk new elections right now. His polling is up a little bit. I think he's willing to risk elections. He does not want a regional war. He understands better than all the people calling for a regional war what the state of our ammunition and everything else is. So I think he's willing to take the risk for this agreement. However, we have this other player called Hamas. And, we're talking about the pressure being put by Egypt and Qatar on Hamas. I don't know. Do we know what real pressure that they can put on Sinwar? We understood what they could put on Hania sitting in Doha. But if Sinwar is totally in charge, can they put real pressure on him? We don't know. It's in the same way that we think we understand what's going on in Iran between the various factions in Iran, and we have dozens of Iranian experts, and you speak to 5 of them and you get 5 different opinions of understanding of what's going on exactly. There, at least, it's more or less, it's somewhat out in the open. Sinwar, do we have any idea? The reports a couple of weeks ago, Sinwar wants a ceasefire. Well, based on what? Did someone speak to him? I mean, we just don't know. So my answer is, as long as the problem is on the Israeli side, which there could have been, I think the momentum can go forward, and I think the U.S. is doing an excellent job of pushing the optimism, pushing the envelope that we're close, we can come to an agreement. But when we hit Sinwar, I don't know what happens. I'm hoping he's going to say yes. I'm hoping he wants to see some fresh air after all this time in his tunnel. But do we know? We don't. That's the problem.
Thanks.
Mick?
Hey, Mark. First, excellent explanation about the protests. That whatever goes on, they're going to be irrelevant as long as Israel exists. And there's also was a great article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the concept of settler colonialism, which people should take a look at. That's a lot of the ideology behind this. So, Mark, I want to ask you a question about Egypt. There's obviously been many tunnels discovered. So two-part question about Egypt. Do you feel Egypt was complicit in the smuggling operation and they're not being called out to save them embarrassment? And the other question is related to the Houthis. Is Egypt, or why is Egypt not putting much more pressure on the Houthis? Because I imagine that they're the Egyptian economy is suffering greatly from the reduction in traffic through the Suez Canal.
Okay, so two parts of that. One is we don't really have an answer to how many of those tunnels were actually open on the Egyptian side. There's a big question there, and I've heard different thoughts that almost all of them were closed, that most of them were closed. I've heard different reports, and having not physically seen them, I won't stand by any of the reports. I also want to say that, look, tunneling between the two parts of Rafah has been going on since the end of the 19th century. It's been because that has been a border in the Ottoman zones, and it became a border between Egypt in terms of the British. It's been a border for a long time, and it went right through the city of Rafah. So smuggling is something that's been going on for a long time there. Now, keep in mind that Egyptian soldiers get paid very little, and so the question becomes: is the government complicit, or do you have enough people who are being bribed and looking the other way? I don't have the answer. Was it the highest priority of the Egyptian government to stop it? Probably not. Were they looking the other way totally? I don't really know. And as to your other question of, Egypt is one of those countries that's really in trouble because of this. There's no question about, I think it's 40% of their income comes from the Suez Canal, and this Suez Canal is down by 60%, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, they're in big trouble. They need this to end. It also needed to end because of things domestically also they needed to end. So
are they exerting any pressure for the Houthis to stop? Like why?
Yeah, no, the Houthis are Shiite. They're supported by Iran. Don't forget, Egypt fought a civil war way back when in Yemen, and it didn't go that well for Egypt. So I don't think they have much ability to pressure the Houthis. Obviously, the Saudis and also fought for a number of years against the Houthis without great success. So everyone wants the Houthis gone, but nobody's willing to send 100,000 troops into the deserts and hills of Yemen in order to get rid of them. So that's the reality. It's one of these things people have to keep in mind constantly. People talk about America coming and doing. Again, in almost all cases, to accomplish anything in war in modern times, yes, you can bomb a power plant, you can bomb various key facilities, but in order to eliminate missiles, in order to eliminate a regime, you got to have boots on the ground. I think the only case that I know of since before World War II of bombing from the air working is Serbia, where the United States and NATO fought against Serbia for, I think, by the 75th day or whatever day it was. I don't remember the exact day. Serbia said, "Uncle." But any other case, look, even World War II, with all the bombing that took place until about 60 days before the end of the war, Germany was producing as much goods as ever. They moved their factories underground, they moved them to various places, but they were still producing despite daylight and nighttime bombing by the United States and Great Britain. So, and think about Vietnam. Think about, how many bombs the United States dropped on Vietnam in the course of that war. Did it stop the North Vietnamese? No. So the only thing that wins wars, I'm afraid, are boots on the ground, as we've seen in Gaza, because we put boots on the ground. and we were able to get rid of the missiles because we got to the missiles. So no one wants to put boots on the ground. That's the reality, and that's one of the problems in the modern world today. Is no one's willing to put boots on the ground except for Putin in Ukraine, and thankfully the Ukrainians pushing back. Michael Weiss.
How serious, Mark, is the threat of arson or missiles or things setting forests or buildings on fire throughout Israel? Is that a strategic threat to Israel?
Okay, okay. Let's put it this way: the strategic threat. I don't think it's so much as fires on buildings as much as number one. The biggest concern is power plants being hit. We only have, I don't know, X number of power plants. They're not enough power plants. We don't have our system is not distributed enough, and we don't have enough reserves. So if to fight a war where there's a possibility, we probably need an extra couple of power plants in reserve to come online. I don't know the electric company claims to have be prepared for quick repairs. I don't know. Ukraine has the advantage of if they're missing a part, they can get it from Europe, from Germany in 6 hours by train. If we're missing a part, it's a big part. It might not fit into a plane, and it will take days to get here. So I consider that a bigger problem. There's also the problem that we may not have put enough oil reserves, because one of the concerns of a full-scale war with Hezbollah is we have to turn off the gas fields in the Mediterranean, because you don't want a gas field that's active to be hit by a missile. A gas field that's not active is not a danger. And most of our power plants now run on natural gas pumped from the sea. We do have oil in reserve, but there's arguments whether we have enough oil in reserve. Obviously, lots of missiles will cause damage. Much more damage, obviously, let's say to Haifa, which is in the range of the shorter range missiles than to Tel Aviv. Also because to get to Tel Aviv, there's a longer time to intercept, and so more interceptors can succeed. But of course, it's a concern. It's a real concern. You're talking about big missiles, excuse me, that have large warheads, and they could knock down an apartment building possibly. I mean, look at the pictures from Kiev when a Russian missile hits an apartment building. It doesn't destroy it, but it's not pretty. Let's put it that way. So that's the concern. Listen, no one wants an all-out war with Hezbollah for all those reasons, and all the many other reasons. Especially because, again, one has to ask: you have an all-out war, how does it end? I mean, do we go into Beirut and occupy Beirut? I mean, that's the one way to bring it to an end. So I don't know. I don't know if we can do that, and if that's the way we can do that. There's a chat question from Jerry Grossman. Do I think that DNC protests will boomerang? When you say boomerang, and boomerang against the protesters, I mean, I think the protesters, again, have gone too far to some extent. It's really going to be hard what they're protesting exactly at any particular moment. And again, if they're calling ceasefire now in Gaza, well, there's a ceasefire underway. The United States is deeply involved in getting a ceasefire. If you're protesting against the existence of the state of Israel, that probably doesn't go over that well. Latest polls, even amongst Democrats, show overwhelming support for Israel's right to exist, supporting Israel to defend itself, and all those type of things. But again, boomerang in what sense? One of the things, American politics is susceptible to pressure groups, is susceptible to small groups, and the Electoral College particularly lends itself to trying to meet the needs of small groups. So, you have a couple of swing states, Michigan being one of them, Michigan having a large Arab American population. So there's a concern there. But, I guess the concern is they're going to stay home, because I really don't see any of these people ultimately voting for from Donald Trump. So we'll see. It won't be a good spectacle. It's really kind of ridiculous that they were going to come to the DNC and didn't really do anything in the Republican convention. But That's their problem. Chaim Gutman.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. Thank you very much for all this information that you are passing on to us. Has there been any progress on the how the Gaza will be handled after the war?
None. That's the tragedy of this war. For those of you who've been reading my diary since the very beginning, I said before we went in with the ground operation that we needed to have a plan for what was going to be the day after. You don't start a ground operation without a goal of where you want to be when it ends. And just saying total victory is not a plan, because okay, even if total victory, what do you want? You don't want to occupy. It's been very clear. We know what we don't. I mean, we all know, we individuals have our own ideas, but the government has made it clear that it does not want to occupy Gaza. I mean, there are people in the government who do want to, but the official Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, has made it clear he does not want to occupy Gaza. So if you don't want to occupy Gaza, then what do you want? How do you want this thing to end? And we are now, like I said before, 10 plus months into this war, and there hasn't even been a serious discussion of the day after. Forget coming up to a conclusion, but a serious discussion of the day after we have not had. So, I don't know. I think we need to find we need a different government, so to speak. Again, whether the United States, and one of our participants is telling me the U.S. has done a lot of work on that. I hope so, but I'm not sure some of it has, how the old saying of psychology is, when you have an idea, the key to making someone accept it is to think it's their idea. That's the question. Whatever ideas the Americans have, can they make the Israelis think it's their idea as well? There have been discussions in the Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense sent a memo, I think it was the second month of the war, outlining its plan for the day after. But it was basically ignored by the government as a government. The Ministry of Defense alone can't implement any policy without the government. Mick, I don't know if you just came to put your hand down. You have another question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay, anyone else? Okay, everybody. 2 weeks, we'll do this again. For those of you in the northeast area, I'm coming to the States in 2 weeks with 3 different times I'm speaking. Once in Elmira, once in Mamaroneck at Westchester Jewish Center, and once in New Jersey, in North, I think it's basically northeast New Jersey. So I will post on one of the updates the locations and times that I'll be speaking. If anyone's in those areas, love to meet you there. And I have 1 or 2 days open, so if anyone is interested, I could still arrange to come to your community and speak. At any rate, thank you all for participating. Hopefully one of these weeks, war updates will end, and I'll go to have a monthly update of what's going on in Israel. I can talk about culture, and I can talk a little about movies, and talk about some good things. Restaurant reviews can return to our daily update, all those nice things which we haven't had for 10 months. So hopefully one of these days we can do that. And I can have some guest people talk about the things I can't talk about, like music and Israeli music and things of that nature. So hopefully we'll get to that. Hopefully this war will end. As one of the broadcasts I listen to every morning on Israeli Army radio says, there will be better days. So let's all hope for better days, and see you all in 2 weeks.